So, what does it actually mean to be American today? I mean, it's a question that sparks endless debate, right? Today, we are diving right into this explainer to unpack that exact question, drawing straight from political scientist Deborah Schildkraut's fascinating study on 21st century American identity. To really get to the roots of our modern identity, we're going to combine Schildkraut's political science research with a massive historical audit of the United States. By zooming out and looking back across tens of thousands of years of North American history, we can actually see exactly how our complex and honestly often contradictory values were forged. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the modern identity question, look at the foundations of the Republic, explore the nation's expansion and deep divisions, chart the rise of industrialization and global power, navigate from the Cold War up to the contemporary era, and finally bring it all together to unpack this multi-creedal American tapestry. Okay, part one, the modern identity question and the idea of a complex tapestry. Let's start right here in the present. You see, Schildkraut's research specifically tested how increasing ethnic diversity impacts what it means to be American. And her big takeaway? Well, being American isn't defined by just one single monolithic trait. Using what she calls multiple traditions theory, her study actually shows that American identity is defined by a really broad range of norms that are often quite complex and even contradictory. We're going to use this powerful idea as our lens as we look back at the events that shaped these traditions. Moving on to part two. The foundations of the Republic and how those very first norms were forged. The history of this land goes way, way back. Tens of thousands of years of continuous indigenous societies, featuring incredibly complex cultures like the Mississippians. Then European colonization enters the picture, bringing some wildly contrasting motives. Take 1607, for example. The English established Jamestown pretty much entirely for profit. But then, just a few years later, in 1620, the Mayflower arrives with pilgrims fleeing religious persecution, and they set up a social contract for self-government. These totally different early motivations, profit on one side, religious freedom on the other, really laid the groundwork for our first complex norms, eventually sparking the Revolutionary War at Lexington and Concord in 1775. By 1776, the Second Continental Congress made it official. The Declaration of Independence forged our foundational ideals. It championed life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the absolutely crucial idea that a government needs the consent of the governed. By completely rejecting European monarchism, the Founding Fathers really set down our first major democratic norms. All right, part three. Expansion, deep division, and the expanding nation and slavery. As the nation pushed out its borders into the 19th century, some profound moral and economic contradictions basically reached a boiling point. By 1860, the southern states had built this highly profitable agricultural system, but it relied entirely on the institution of slavery, enslaving 4 million people just to meet the massive European demand for cotton. Up north, conversely, states were building an industrial economy fueled by wage labor, and abolitionist sentiments were rapidly growing. These were two fundamentally contradictory systems, and they simply could not coexist. 750,000. After the southern states seceded to form the Confederacy, the American Civil War erupted in 1861. And that staggering number? That represents the estimated soldier casualties. It is still the deadliest war in American history, which really highlights the massive, totally tragic scale of the conflict fought to preserve the Union. Notice how fast things were moving here. Right after acquiring the American Southwest from Mexico in 1848, the nation plunged straight into the crucible of the Civil War. By 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing designated enslaved people. And then the Union victory in 1865 led to the total abolition of slavery. Crucially, during Reconstruction, the 14th Amendment stepped in to explicitly guarantee equal rights and citizenship to Black Americans. This fundamentally altered the Constitution and wove a vital, brand new thread into our national identity. Which brings us to part four, industrialization and global power, taking us from the Gilded Age through World War II. Coming out of Reconstruction, America leaped into the Gilded Age. And check out this scale. Between 1880 and 1914, an unprecedented 22 million immigrants arrived from Europe and beyond. They quickly filled jobs in booming mines, mills, and factories. This massive wave of immigration wove just incredible ethnic diversity into the workforce, and it completely challenged and expanded what it actually meant to be an American during a time of explosive economic growth. Throughout all this, our societal norms were constantly being tested and redefined. In 1920, the 19th Amendment finally granted women the right to vote. But then, just a decade later, the Great Depression completely shattered the global economy. That crisis prompted President Roosevelt's New Deal, introducing sweeping safety nets like Social Security. It permanently shifted the norm of what the federal government's role was in everyday American life, right before the shock of Pearl Harbor pulled the entire nation into World War II. President Roosevelt famously called the nation the arsenal of democracy, and that phrase perfectly captures this massive shift in identity. The U.S. completely mobilized its economy to back the Allies, throwing 40% of its GDP into the war effort. Tens of millions of workers, including women and minorities stepping into entirely new roles, flooded the active labor force. This industrial explosion ended the Great Depression and really cemented America's new norm as a global powerhouse.
Let's look at Part 5, the Cold War to Contemporary Times, focusing on superpowers and civil rights.
Following the Second World War, the United States had to navigate a deeply divided globe. The Cold War was essentially a decades-long indirect standoff with the Soviet Union. Driven by a policy of containing communism, the U.S. formed the NATO alliance. This intense rivalry drove pretty much everything, from the terrifying nuclear arms race, where mutually assured destruction was a daily shadow, to the incredible push for technological superiority we saw during the space race. But at the exact same time, domestic social movements were completely transforming the country from the inside out. The 1954 Brown v. Board of Education ruling finally deemed public school segregation unconstitutional, and the tireless, hard-fought work of civil rights activists paved the way for the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. Honestly, from putting humans on the moon to the collapse of the Soviet Union to the major foreign policy shifts following September 11th, this timeline proves that American identity is never static. It is actively, constantly evolving. Finally, Part 6, the multi-creedal American tapestry and synthesizing this complex identity. So, zooming all the way back out to the present day, we can see exactly why Deborah Schildkraut concluded that our identity is a complex, contradictory set of norms. Think about it. We hold these foundational ideals of liberty, yet we grapple with the painful legacy of slavery. We were built by mass immigration, yet we are constantly pushed forward by ongoing struggles for civil rights. Schildkraut's data actually reveals that most Americans today, completely regardless of their own ethnic background, share this incredibly complex, multi-creedal view of what makes someone American. Our norms were never just one simple thing. They are a living, breathing tapestry, woven from 10,000 years of habitation, centuries of colonization, revolution, deep division, and hard-won progress. So, as America continues to diversify, how will this complex, multi-creedal identity evolve in the 21st century? How exactly is the next chapter of the American story going to be written? Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with me.